Welcome to Principals on the Come Up, where we transform schools into hallelujah success stories. How many of you spend most of your day managing discipline referrals? And have you ever thought of ways to reduce the referrals without ISS, without suspensions, and without corporal punishment? Yeah, that's right, I said corporal punishment. So you say, well, Dr. Polk, you must be losing your mind. How can I reduce referrals without doing all of that? So if you know you need help, you're in the right place. And if you're responsible for discipline, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to be talking about student discipline. And student discipline is step number 2. And that is of the 7 most powerful pillars to produce a high quality school. 7 most powerful pillars to produce a high quality school. But if you don't have courage, principal or assistant principal, you cannot bring this transformation if you don't have the courage. So what I want you to do right now that you know what we're going to be talking about, I want you to share this with at least five of your friends or colleagues to let them know that they are about to find out some information that's going to transform their life and transform their school. That's right. That's right. Hit it 5 times. Hit that share 5 times. So what we're going to do, we're going to discuss 3 things. 3 things. To reduce referrals, to reduce suspension, and to reduce expulsion. What? You say, what? Yes, we can do that. We can do that. Let me tell you how I first had the opportunity to be able to practice this and to actually see it work. Well, what I'm talking about is restorative practices. Restorative practices. Now, I know you've heard of restorative practices, and it was something that I had never heard about. All I knew is that I was assigned to one of the lowest performing schools in the state of Texas and the lowest performing campus in my district. That's right. I had to deal with drugs. I had to deal with weapons. I had to deal with gangs. I had to deal with fighting between groups, Hispanics against African Americans, African Americans against Hispanics. And on top of that, they were failing. They were all failing. We had one of the lowest attendance rates. And the state said, if you are a school and you are a failing school, that parents have the opportunity to take their children elsewhere. That's right. That's right. You don't have to go there. You can go someplace else where your child can get a good education. That's right. That's right. That is the kind of school that I was assigned to. Hi, my name is Dr. Barbara Polk, and I'm known as a turnaround principal. I was assigned by the Texas Education Agency to go into schools that were designated by the Texas Education Agency as low performing and get those schools turned around. I was also chosen by the Harvard Graduate School of Education with their Urban School Institute to learn about ways for us to turn those schools around, especially our schools who are urban, our schools that are poor rural, our schools that have been assigned by the state as low performing. What can we do to eliminate all of that and bring our schools up? And that's exactly what we did. So let's get started. Now that you've heard my story, let's get started and talk about restorative practices. Now, the background for restorative practices had to do with the school to prison pipeline. Yes, several years ago, the state of Texas, as a matter of fact, with the Texas A&M University, they did research to find out why we had so many of our children of color and so many of our children that were in special education. All of those and boys, very few girls, were the ones that were being suspended. They were the ones that were being sent to ISS. They were the ones that were being expelled. And they also found that there was a correlation between what was going on at that school and what was going on at prison. So they called that the school to prison pipeline. So they did the research and they found out, yes, truly it is. Those students who were getting suspended and getting expelled and sent to ISS, because whether you know it or not, all of that data that you have to input in the computer about your students' discipline, all of that goes to the state. And the other thing is they rank your school based upon the amount of referrals, the amount of expulsions, the amount of placement at the alternative campus. They rank your school based upon all of that. And ultimately, the school where I was, it was ranked as unsafe. And if you want a quality school, you do not want a school that is unsafe. So we're going to talk about restorative practices. We're going to talk about four things. We're going to talk about four things. We're going to talk about building healthy relationships with restorative practices. We're going to talk about the needs of the community. Number two. Number three, we're going to talk about restorative practices as it helps to resolve conflicts. And we're going to talk about restorative practices as it helps to repair any harm and restore positive relationships. Now, the first one, build healthy relationships. Now, as we build healthy relationships in our classrooms between our educators and our students, there are things that through the restorative practices training, there are things that we have to have going on in that classroom to help build relationships. For example, as you stand at that doorway when your students come in, what are you standing there for? Why are you there? Well, some of you say, well, the principal told me to stand in the hallway to make sure children are not loitering around, to make sure that they get to their next class, to make sure that there are no fights in the hallway. Wrong. Okay, now that may be a byproduct, but as you stand at that doorway, you are there to build a relationship with those students as they come into the classroom. So you want to talk about reducing the number of referrals? How about building a relationship before the instruction even starts? For example, if you have a young lady who has been out and she may have even been on maternity leave, and this is her first time back, and you tell her how beautiful she looks or how good she looks, do you think she is going to come in there and disrupt your class once you have given her that compliment? She is getting ready for instruction. Or a young man that has a nice haircut and you say something about it, you have built a relationship. And there are practices that are taught through restorative practices for you to do the kinds of things that I just mentioned that will establish a relationship as they walk into the classroom. They will know that you have your classroom organized to do X, Y, and Z. So is this a 100% foolproof method? I said reduce. The rest of it as far as your instruction, and the rest of it as far as your content knowledge, the rest of it as far as your delivery of instruction, that is up to you. But as far as discipline is concerned, you want to, first of all, you want to build relationships between you and your students. The second thing you want to discuss is the needs of the school community. You cannot have restorative practices in your little classroom as a silo. Everyone in your school district, everyone in your school building has to have restorative practices. Everyone has to be on the same accord. You can't have room 201 say, oh yeah, we're going to do restorative practices. The students don't know that it's called restorative practices. They just know that this is how we treat each other in this classroom. And the teacher in 202 is going to say, all right, when you walk into this classroom, first of all, when that bell rings, you need to have your butt in the seat. Secondly, you need to make sure that you are doing that warm up before we get started with instruction, because that's how we're going to operate here. If you don't get here on time, then I'm going to mark you absent. That's right, I'm going to mark you absent. And if you are a secondary teacher, or if you are a high school teacher, when a child gets marked absent, first of all, that child is in danger of receiving his full credit. And secondly, if that child is marked absent, the butt is not in the seat. That means the school district is not getting the buck for that student being in that seat, which affects you, Miss Teacher, Mr. Teacher, and your check. So we want butts in the seat. But you have to have everyone in that school community on the same accord. You can't have one classroom doing one thing and the other classroom doing something else. Do all of your restorative practices have to look alike in a classroom? No. There are several ways, there are several opportunities for you to use these practices. We found in our school, and of course, this did not happen overnight. And if you're in a school that has discipline issues, you have referral issues, you have ISS, and you know you need some help. If you are one of those, then it is going to have to be a requirement. We're going to have to set up a school culture where everyone is expected to have some type of restorative practice going on in his or her classroom. Well, now you may say, well, I was in Mr. Howard's class, and I didn't particularly care for him. He didn't have anything nice to say to me or to anybody else in that classroom. But he knew his calculus, and I learned a lot from him. And he didn't have to go through all of that. Well, you know, that's just fine. That's just fine. As I said before, you know, this is like discipline. It's just like discipline. You know, if I did something wrong and my mama got the belt from me, all she had to do is let me see the belt coming. And I can tell you, that's the end of all my wrongdoings. But did it work that same way with my brother? No. You could take that belt out one time, 2 times, 3 times, and once those licks wore off, he's right back doing the same thing. Would restorative practices have helped him in the classroom? Because you know, if he was cutting up at home, you know he was doing the same thing at school. You know he was running away from instruction because he wasn't a good student. Can we do something with restorative practices that's going to help those students stay in class and learn the content that you're teaching? Absolutely right. The third thing is to resolve conflicts and to have accountability. So, you know, remember back in the day, you would have your board and you would state, you do not do these things in this classroom. You do not speak out of turn. You are out of turn. When you want to speak, you raise your hand and don't open your mouth until I call on your head. That was something that I used to do. I was known for that. That's what I knew. That's all I knew. That's all I knew. Did it work on some? Yeah, almost. You know, that's just the way it was. But now, when you know better, you do better. So you are going as the teacher, principals, make sure this is going on in your building. You and that particular class, you decide how y'all are going to treat each other in that classroom. You decide that together. You decide how students are going to treat each other. You're not going to yell at each other. You're not going to call each other names. And you are going to come to that consensus in the classroom. How are you going to treat the teacher? How are you going to talk to the teacher? How are you going to approach the teacher? We all need to decide that. It shouldn't be a secret. I shouldn't decide that, oh, don't call me by that name once I did it. Well, nobody told me that. So that is accountability. That is a way for you to resolve conflicts. And once you have decided how you're going to treat each other, then of course we're going to have some times when that treatment is just not right. It is just not working. So let's decide before it even happens, just what's going to be the consequences within this classroom. What's going to be the consequences? And the consequence is I'm going to write a referral and I'm going to get you out of my classroom. That is not a restorative practice. We are here as our individual community. And that's how we are going to learn to respect each other. That's how we're going to learn to build a community. And the last thing that is so important, and that is to repair harm and restore positive relationships. Now, let's talk about the difference between practices and justice. Now, we know we have restorative practices. We talked about that. But then you have restorative justice. Now, restorative justice came directly from the law enforcement system, where it was established that we're going to repair the crime. We're going to give, especially those new people, especially those youth, let's repair the crime. They did these things, or they committed this crime, and it may have been their first time committing the crime. Let's see if we can repair that. That is called restorative justice. They're already a part of the juvenile system, or they're already a part of the law enforcement system, and they have caused harm to someone in the community. And that's where restorative justice takes place. Then we want to, with restorative justice, we want to encounter practices, and we're going to decide together how we are going to deal with whatever harm you have done in that community. That's called restorative justice. How are we going to repair the harm that you did? And then the third thing is called transformation. And of course, just as it says transformation, with restorative justice, how are you going to bring about a change? How are you going to bring about a change in your community for the harm that you have caused the community? That's the difference between restorative practices and restorative justice. Now, with restorative practices, we will find that our attendance rate will increase. That's right. Our attendance rate will increase because students now know that they have a relationship with their teachers. They know now that they have relationships with their classmates. Have you been to a class and you don't even know that person's name except for when they call the roll? You don't know anything about them. So that means you're like the teacher who is writing out a student and sending them down to the assistant principal's office. You have no relationship. When you're in a community, you have a community, you know each other, and there are ways to learn to do this in restorative practices. Oh, you may say, well, I don't have time for this. I have time for this. I have a curriculum to teach. My students are behind. They call this learning loss. And by the way, it's no such thing as a learning loss. There's no such thing as a learning loss. Okay? Let's just deal with that right now. When these children were out of the school, hey, Marilyn Kennison, good to see you. No such thing as a learning loss. When these children were out of school, they did learn. Yes, they did. They may not have learned the curriculum, but they were exposed to their family. They were exposed to conversation. They learned something. My grandchildren learned how to fly a paper kite, how to make a paper kite. Isn't that something? They learned something. So instead of us looking back on what we think that they don't know, let's look forward on what we're preparing them to learn as they go from grade 3 to grade 4, grade 8 to grade 9. Let's prepare them for that. And then we do interventions to support the things that they need in order to move forward. Anyway, I digress. These practices are going to be essential to your academics, because now those students that you used to write out of class, they're not out of class, they're in class. Those students who were always tardy to your class, they're not tardy anymore, because they want to find out what's going on in your class because they have a relationship. And I'm going to disappoint my teacher if I'm tardy for the class. Now, as far as the teachers are concerned, teachers, we expect you to be prepared for instruction. You know, the old saying is, you know, there's no instruction without discipline. Well, if there is discipline, teachers, you need to bring the instruction. And you need to bring the best instruction that you have. Now that you have all eyes on you, the expectation is, I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn. And the students will say, because I have a relationship, I'm going to try extra hard. I'm going to try extra hard to learn whatever it is that this teacher is trying to teach me, because I have a relationship. I'm going to try extra hard to work with this person who's sitting on the side of me, because I know the kinds of challenges they have at home. So I'm gonna work extra hard, because that's my friend. I've learned to have a relationship with this person in this class right now. So when you start talking about restorative practices, and the restorative practices that I'm referring to are a part of the National Educators for Restorative Practices.com. You go there, you get the training. I have been into schools for, hi, Sean. Good seeing you. Good seeing you. Sean is one of our exceptional students. During his high school days at Lincoln High School, Sean was a student who always wanted to excel. And we did establish relationships in our classrooms. Each class was different. It was a different community. And especially in high school, for our young people who are involved in athletics, for our young people who are involved in the fine arts, in choir, in band, for our students who are involved in academics, we have all kinds of people in the community. But we find that our students who are involved in all of these extracurricular activities, they do work hard. They do go the extra mile. And we have to have a relationship established in those classes through the restorative practices. Did I know about restorative practices back then? Heck no, I didn't know anything about restorative practices. I just know that we had to have a relationship. We had to respect each other. I had to know that my co-teacher, Mary Lathan, right down the hallway, had the same kinds of practices in her classroom, or maybe something a little different, but we respected our students, and our students respected us, and we respected each other in the classroom. When we have that, that's called restorative practices. And it's just not something that just drops out of the sky. There is a process, and restorative practices is not a program. It is not a program. It is, you can incorporate that with PBIS. You can incorporate that with CHAMPS. You can incorporate that with any other kind of program. But restorative practices is a process. And when you go through a process, things don't change immediately. Things change little by little. And you know, the important thing is that we have to have restorative practices in order to work with adults in our buildings, because we have some adults who we don't have a relationship with. We see them in the hallway and we don't even make eye contact with them. So if that's happening to adults and we are trying to fix that, can we do and start with building relationships in the classroom? Saying something nice about a teacher that's down the hall, even if we know that there are some issues down there. Can we do that? All of that is a part of restorative practices. So as we close, I want to tell you that with restorative practices, as we go from district to district with restorative practices, as I train teachers and train principals using the restorative practices process, there are some steps and there's some information that have to be shared and have to be built in to the process of instruction. We have found that teachers who use this the first year, it's kind of rough. It's kind of rough. And then that second year, we find that they get a little more comfortable. And we find that we have more people who are going to come on board. And the other thing, too, is that when you start building relationships in your school, you're going to find, principals, that your teachers are not going to be so eager to leave your building. Do you know what I'm talking about? Especially if you are in an urban school district, especially if you are in a school that has been ranked by the state as needing improvement. You're going to find that restorative practices will help to keep your teachers on your campus. It's just amazing. All I can tell you is the experience that I have had when I started the low performing campus. I couldn't get anybody to come to the school. And by the third year, fourth year, we had people coming in January saying, I heard you have a vacancy. And I heard people love it over here. The children are excelling. The adults get along. And it's all because of restorative practices. So restorative practices is just something that if we get that in place in your building, principals, if we get that in place in classrooms, we're going to see our performance increase. We're going to see attendance increase. We are going to see that our community will change. We're going to see that our culture changes. We're going to see the climate change, and all for the good, because we have established and built relationships. So as we close, I want you to go to barbararaypope.com and sign on for any more information you'd like if you need some assistance with your restorative practices. And remember, principal, it is not an easy thing. You are going to have courage to bring the transformation that your school is going to need. And this is step number 2 of one of the 7 most powerful pillars to produce a high quality school. We'll see you next time.